When you look at the way life unfolds inside of a marriage, you begin to realize that most women are not starving for physical attention. They're starving for emotional fulfillment. On the surface, everything may appear to be in order. There's a husband, there are children, there's a home, maybe even financial stability. But beneath that structure lies a quiet hunger, and that hunger is not satisfied by routine. What they long for is not always another person's touch, but another person's presence, someone who truly listens, someone who looks them in the eye and makes them feel seen, someone who doesn't just pass by them in the hallway of their own life, but actually pauses to acknowledge them. This is where vulnerability begins to open up like a crack in the wall, and it's often invisible until it's too late. Day by day, small dismissals accumulate. A husband who comes home and buries himself in his phone. A partner who gives one-word answer. A household where good night becomes more mechanical than meaningful. None of it looks catastrophic from the outside, but emotionally it is like drops of water eroding stone. When that erosion continues long enough, the craving for attention grows stronger. It's not a craving born of weakness. It's born of being human. Every person wants to be valued, validated, and her married women, despite the ring on their finger, are not immune to this. If anything, the ring often intensifies the paradox. On paper, they have companionship, yet in their hearts, they can feel completely alone. It's easy for outsiders to assume that being married solves loneliness, but often the opposite is true. Loneliness inside a relationship is heavier than loneliness outside of it because it carries the weight of unmet expectation. The woman remembers how she once felt desired, how her partner once paid attention, how conversations used to flow effortlessly. She remembers the laughter, the compliments, the energy that came with early love. Now, when that energy fades, she feels the contrast more sharply. A stranger offering kind words can suddenly feel more intoxicating than a husband offering silence. And that's how vulnerability works. It doesn't always arrive in moments of chaos. It shows up in the quiet absence of what once was. Think about it. When you truly hear someone, you give them more than your words. You give them your presence. Married women often don't get that presence. Their husbands may provide financially, may fix things around the house, may fulfill the role society expects of them, but they forget the most essential part: connection. A woman who feels disconnected at home will subconsciously begin scanning her environment for connection elsewhere, even if she doesn't realize she's doing it. It could be a co-worker, a neighbor, or even a stranger who simply notices her new haircut. That recognition, no matter how small, ignites something inside her because it touches the very part of her that has been neglected. Now here's where it gets deeper. Emotional neglect doesn't shout, it whispers. It doesn't come as a sudden storm. It comes as a slow drift. And the dangerous part of a slow drift is that you don't notice how far you've gone until you look up and realize you're completely off course. A woman who never intended to open her heart to anyone outside her marriage often finds herself doing so because she was not anchored by emotional fulfillment within it. When you're starved, even crumbs feel like a feast. That's why the attention of someone else can feel irresistible. It's not the size of the gesture. It's the timing, the tone, the intention behind it. When she's been waiting years for someone to simply ask how she's really doing, the person who finally does becomes a magnet. Every human being has emotional needs, but women especially thrive on communication, intimacy, and affirmation. If those needs are ignored, they don't disappear, they intensify. They begin to shape her behavior, her thoughts, her perception of the world. What once seemed unthinkable, entertaining the attention of another, begins to feel like a natural response to her unmet desires. She might not even label it as seeking something romantic. At first, it's just a conversation, just a moment of being valued. But step by step, it creates an opening. That opening, if fed, becomes a doorway. The irony is, many men don't realize how easy it is to prevent this vulnerability. It's not about lavish gifts or grand gestures. It's about the simple act of presence. It's about listening without distraction, noticing without being prompted, offering a word of appreciation without being asked. But because so many marriages fall into the trap of routine, those small acts vanish. In their absence, the emotional vacuum grows stronger. And the bigger the vacuum, the more powerful the pull of outside attention becomes. What outsiders see as weakness in a married woman is often just a symptom of unmet emotional reality. She's not chasing someone else because she wants to destroy her marriage. She's leaning into the space where she feels alive again. Emotional starvation will always search for food. And the person who offers that food through attention, affirmation, or appreciation becomes more than just another face. They become the answer to a question she has been silently asking for years. Do I still matter? When her own home doesn't answer that question, the answer from someone else feels impossible to resist. Marriage often creates a picture of stability, but that stability is not always rooted in connection. It's rooted in routine. Many married women live inside an illusion that everything is secure because the bills are paid, the home is intact, the children are cared for, and the partnership still exists on paper. But beneath that outward sense of order lies a dangerous emptiness. The security is material, not emotional. The body of the marriage is intact, but the soul has grown faint. When passion is replaced by predictability, when curiosity is replaced by schedules, when innocence is replaced by obligations, a woman begins to feel safe yet unseen. That is the paradox. She has what looks like a strong foundation, but inside she feels like a ghost in her own life. In the early stages of marriage, the energy is alive with possibility. The couple talks about dreams, makes plans, explores each other with fresh excitement. Every touch carries electricity. Every conversation feels new. But as time moves on, comfort replaces curiosity. What was once exciting becomes ordinary. The man who used to marvel at her beauty begins to overlook it. The woman who once felt like the center of his world now feels like a background character in his daily grind. The security of routine is there, but the romance is gone. That illusion of safety becomes a trap because she is lulled into thinking she should be content, yet her heart whispers that something essential is missing. The absence of danger, the absence of struggle, the absence of novelty. These things don't always bring peace. Sometimes they bring a slow death of desire. A woman doesn't just want to be safe. She wants to be alive. And when a marriage begins to feel more like a contract than a connection, the craving for aliveness becomes overwhelming. It doesn't announce itself with a bang. It creeps in during quiet moments, like when she notices her husband's eyes glued to a screen instead of hers, or when weeks pass without genuine intimacy. She begins to question her place, not in the home, but in his heart. The illusion of security is also reinforced by societal expectations. She's told she should be grateful for a husband who provides, who stays, who doesn't cheat, who is responsible. Gratitude for stability is important, but stability without passion is half a life. Women crave to be cherished, not just sustained. They want to feel chosen daily, not just once on their wedding day. When that daily choosing fades, a married woman becomes more open to those who make her feel chosen in even the smallest ways. A simple compliment from a colleague can feel like a burst of light compared to the dim familiarity at home. That doesn't mean she's weak. It means she's human, searching for affirmation where it is lacking. Another layer of this illusion is that routine convinces both partners they are fine. The bills are paid, the kids are okay. They share meals, they sleep under the same roof. Outwardly, nothing seems broken. But beneath the surface, the absence of emotional connection is a fracture widening with every day because there's no visible crisis. There's no urgency to repair it. The couple convinces themselves they're secure, while in reality they're drifting further apart. That's when an outside presence feels more significant than it should. A stranger who makes her laugh, who listens without distraction, who notices her effort, suddenly feels like an oasis in a desert she didn't even realize she was trapped in. The security of marriage is also blind to how vulnerable she really is. She may tell herself she would never entertain attention from another man, that she is loyal and committed. But loyalty is not just about intention. It's about emotional resilience. If her emotional needs are not being met consistently at home, then her defense is weakened. She isn't out searching for validation, but when it appears, it feels irresistible because it exposes how deprived she truly is. Security has a way of numbing awareness until the hunger becomes undeniable. That's why married women can sometimes be the easiest prey, not because they are actively seeking, but because they have been conditioned to ignore their own emptiness until someone else shines a light on it. This illusion is dangerous not only for the woman, but for the marriage itself. Many husbands rely too heavily on the appearance of stability, assuming their wives will always remain faithful simply because of vows, children, or financial ties. But vows don't protect against emotional starvation. Paper doesn't prevent loneliness. A ring doesn't guarantee fulfillment. When a woman feels unseen, she doesn't stop needing attention. She simply stops expecting it from her husband. And once she stops expecting, she becomes more receptive to receiving it from others. Routine can feel like safety, but in truth, it is monotony disguised as peace. The woman begins to crave unpredictability, adventure, the spark of being wanted again. Even the smallest disruption from outside, a new conversation, a different perspective, a gentle reminder of her beauty, feels monumental compared to the deadness of repetition. The illusion of security has convinced her she is settled, but emotionally she is anything but settled. That's why when someone comes along who disrupts that illusion, who awakens what has been dormant, the pull is incredibly strong. She isn't leaving security behind, she's escaping emptiness. The illusion is powerful because it convinces her to suppress her own desires in the name of stability. She tells herself she shouldn't want more, she should be content, she should be grateful. But desire doesn't disappear just because it's ignored. It grows quietly in the shadows until the right stimulus brings it roaring back to life. And the truth is, once that illusion shatters, once she realizes the security she clung to was really just a cage without passion, she becomes highly vulnerable to whoever offers her the freedom of being seen again. Neglect inside a marriage does not always appear in obvious ways. It isn't always a man yelling at his wife or ignoring her existence completely. More often, it shows up in subtle patterns that accumulate over time, creating an invisible wall between two people who once promised each other the world. It's the small things, a missed compliment, a lack of eye contact, the absence of genuine curiosity in her day that slowly chip away at her sense of being valued. For many married women, it's not that their husbands are cruel. It's that they are absent in the moments that matter most. And absence over time is just as damaging as direct rejection. The power of neglect lies in its quiet consistency. A woman doesn't feel its impact after one day or even 1 week, but after months and years of not being heard, not being touched with intention, not being appreciated for her efforts, she begins to lose a piece of herself. She goes from being vibrant and expressive to guarded and resigned. The sparkle in her eyes fades not because she stopped caring, but because she stopped being cared for in the way she needed. It is this slow erosion of her emotional landscape that makes her susceptible to anyone who offers even the faintest glow of recognition. Neglect is dangerous because it's often invisible to the one causing it. The husband may think he is doing his job by paying bills, maintaining the household, and showing up physically. But showing up physically is not the same as showing up emotionally. He doesn't see that the way he brushes off her stories, the way he forgets to notice her new dress, or the way he walks past her without affection or tiny cuts that never heal. She notices, she feels each one. And with every unnoticed effort, every unanswered need, the emotional distance grows larger. What makes neglect so powerful is the contrast it creates. Someone else steps in. Imagine a woman who hasn't been complimented in years suddenly having a coworker notice her smile. The comment may be small, but in her heart it feels monumental because it stands against the backdrop of neglect. What her husband stopped doing, someone else effortlessly does. And the emotional hunger inside her clings to that difference like a lifeline. It's not that the outsider is extraordinary. It's that her own partner has allowed ordinary kindness and attention to vanish. The contrast is what gives the outsider power. Another layer of neglect is the absence of intimacy, not just physically but emotionally. When conversations become shallow, when nights are spent in silence instead of laughter, when every interaction is about logistics instead of connection, the woman feels a void. She doesn't stop desiring closeness. She just learns to live without it. But desire doesn't die. It waits. And when someone finally steps into her world and listens with patience, touches her with care, or values her thoughts, the floodgates open. Neglect prepares the soil, and attention becomes the seed. The tragedy of neglect is that it doesn't feel urgent. A husband might not realize how deep the damage is because his wife is still there, still functioning, still keeping the family afloat. She cooks, she cleans, she manages responsibilities, and on the surface, she plays her role. But inside, she's quietly starving. That starvation is invisible until an outside presence awakens it. By then, the neglect has built such a strong foundation that it only takes a little attention from elsewhere to tip the scales. Neglect also strips a woman of her sense of worth within her marriage. She begins to wonder, am I even desirable anymore? Do I even matter to him? These questions eat away at her self-esteem. And once self-esteem is fractured, she becomes more vulnerable to validation from anyone willing to offer it. What her partner fails to provide becomes the very thing she seeks elsewhere, often without even realizing it. It's not always a conscious decision. It's an unconscious pull toward the places where her needs are met. Consider how neglect works in everyday life. If you starve a plant of water and sunlight, it doesn't die immediately. It withers slowly, its color fading day by day. But the moment you give it water, it responds with life because its need for nourishment never disappeared. It was just unmet. A married woman experiencing neglect is no different. She withers in silence, continuing her duties, holding her family together, but inside she is aching. And when attention finally comes, it doesn't feel optional. It feels necessary. What outsiders often misunderstand is that women in this position are not looking for grand, dramatic gestures. They don't need someone to buy them expensive gifts or sweep them away to another country. What they crave are the simple things: a moment of presence, a word of acknowledgement, a gesture of appreciation. The reason these small acts carry so much power is because they have been missing for so long. Neglect has lowered the bar of expectation, making even minimal effort feel like abundance. Neglect is powerful because it reshapes her emotional compass. It trains her to stop expecting love at home, which means when love shows up elsewhere, it feels like destiny. She may convince herself that this new attention is fate, when in reality it is simply the absence of neglect. The person giving her that attention is not always extraordinary. They are simply filling the void her husband left behind. But to her, the experience is extraordinary because it feels like the very thing she has been longing for in silence. The power of neglect is in its silence, its invisibility, its gradual erosion of the bond that once held two people together. It doesn't shout. It doesn't break the marriage in one blow. It quietly unravels it thread by thread until the woman feels like she is standing alone, even while sharing a home with someone else. And in that isolation, the smallest spark of acknowledgement from another becomes irresistible, not because she is weak, but because she has been deprived of the very nourishment every human being needs to be seen, to be valued, and to be loved. A structured married life often promises peace and stability, but with that structure comes a slow removal of spontaneity. The daily rhythm of responsibilities, build children, and routines begins to dominate the atmosphere. At first, that rhythm feels comforting because it provides order and predictability, but over time it turns into monotony. The same conversations are repeated, the same routes are taken, the same arguments circle back without resolution. And the sense of adventure that once electrified the relationship fades into the background. For a woman, this loss of unpredictability doesn't erase her need for excitement. It intensifies it. She may not say it out loud, but inside she craves something new, something that breaks the dull rhythm of her days. In the beginning of a relationship, every moment carries a spark. The unknown is thrilling because both partners are discovering each other, exploring new depths of connection, and experimenting with experiences. Every date feels like an adventure. Every conversation feels fresh. But marriage often shifts that energy. The unknown disappears, replaced with the predictable. When everything becomes mapped out and rehearsed, the natural human craving for novelty goes unfulfilled. This is when the smallest form of adventure from the outside world feels larger than life. A smile from a stranger, a surprising conversation with someone new, or a moment that feels unpredictable can awaken feelings she thought had long disappeared. This craving for adventure is not shallow. It is rooted in human psychology. People are wired to desire growth, change, and novelty. When those elements are missing, life begins to feel stale. For married women, especially those who feel confined by roles of wife, mother, or caregiver, monotony can feel suffocating. Every day starts to look the same, and even though she may be fulfilling responsibility, her spirit feels caged. That is when adventure, in any form, becomes intoxicating. She doesn't need extravagant trips or dramatic gestures to feel alive again. Sometimes it's as simple as someone introducing her to a new idea, sparking a deep conversation, or making her laugh in a way she hasn't laughed in years. The ordinary becomes extraordinary when contrasted with monotony. It is in this space that vulnerability begins to grow. A woman who feels stuck in routine becomes more sensitive to anything that interrupts that pattern. If her husband is always tired, distracted, or disinterested, then the absence of adventure inside the marriage amplifies the allure of adventure outside of it. The novelty doesn't have to be grand. It just has to be different. And difference, when you've been trapped in sameness, feels like liberation. This is why married women often lean towards situations that reignite their curiosity, because curiosity makes them feel alive, valued, and present again. Adventure is not only about external experiences, it's also about emotional stimulation. When she talks to someone who makes her feel seen, when she shares thoughts she hasn't expressed in years, and they are received with interest, it feels like she has rediscovered a lost part of herself. That rediscovery is powerful because it reminds her of who she used to be before routine dulled her edges. In that moment, she feels not only desired but alive, and aliveness becomes addictive when it has been missing for so long. The lack of adventure inside a marriage often happens slowly, and because it happens slowly, it feels normal. The couple convinces themselves that routine is maturity. That stability is the ultimate goal. But stability without novelty creates stagnation. A woman doesn't stop being a human being with desires, dreams, and curiosity just because she is married. When those parts of her are not nurtured within the marriage, she becomes unconsciously receptive to anyone or anything that awakens them. It doesn't mean she's intentionally seeking someone else. It means her spirit is searching for oxygen. And when someone gives her that oxygen in the form of attention, excitement, or unpredictability, she leans toward it almost instinctively. Another layer of this craving is the way monotony affects her sense of identity. When she is consumed by structure, she forgets the adventurous, playful, spontaneous side of herself. She remembers the woman who used to laugh without restraint, who used to feel beautiful and alive, and she wonders where that woman went if her marriage no longer gives her space to express that side. Then someone else's presence that brings it out feels irresistible. That presence doesn't just make her feel wanted, it makes her feel like herself again. What makes this vulnerability even stronger is that adventure doesn't need to compete with responsibility. It simply needs to coexist with it. A married woman can handle her daily tasks and still crave adventure. The problem arises when the marriage gives her only tasks and no adventure at all. The imbalance pushes her towards spaces that feel fresh and unpredictable. Because balance is a human need, she may not consciously realize it, but her attraction to outside attention is often less about romance and more about reclaiming balance in her emotional life. Monotony numbs and adventure awakens. That is the simple truth. When a married woman feels that her life has been reduced to predictability, she is no longer choosing between loyalty and disloyalty. She is choosing between numbness and aliveness. And in that choice, even the smallest spark of excitement feels like a flame worth chasing. The routine convinces her she is safe, but it does not convince her she is alive. That gap between safety and aliveness becomes the very space where vulnerability grows. And anyone who steps into that gap with the promise of something different, something new, something adventurous, gains her attention without even trying. Marriage has a way of reshaping identities. A woman enters it with her own dreams, her own individuality, her own sense of self. But over time, those things often get buried beneath the titles she carries. She becomes a wife, she becomes a mother, she becomes a caregiver. And while those roles are meaningful, they begin to overshadow her personal identity. What once defined her, her passions, her curiosity, her ambitions, becomes secondary to what's required of her inside the marriage. Slowly, she stops asking herself who she is and instead defines herself by who she is to others. And when that shift happens, a silent battle begins inside her. She loves her family, she values her responsibilities. But she can feel pieces of herself fading away in the process. This silent battle is not something most women announce. They don't sit their husbands down and say, I feel like I'm losing myself. Instead, they carry it quietly, trying to reconcile the person they once were with the roles they now play. At times, she may even convince herself that this is how it's supposed to be, that sacrificing her individuality is the price of a stable marriage. But no matter how much she tries to silence it, there remains an inner voice that longs to be acknowledged, an inner self that wants to be recognized as more than just someone's partner or someone's mother. That longing grows stronger the more it is ignored. When a woman feels that her individuality has been erased, she becomes highly vulnerable to anyone who reminds her of it. A simple compliment about her intelligence, a genuine interest in her opinions, or recognition of her beauty beyond the roles she plays can awaken something she thought was gone. Gone. In that moment, she doesn't just feel flattered. She feels like herself again. That sense of rediscovery is intoxicating because it reconnects her to the identity she has been missing. And when you've been starved of identity, the person who feeds it becomes magnetic. Inside the marriage, the erosion of identity often happens through small, unnoticed dynamics. A husband may grow accustomed to her always being available, always taking care of things, always managing the household. Her efforts become expected rather than appreciated. He doesn't necessarily intend to diminish her, but by not acknowledging her individuality, he reinforces the idea that her value is tied only to her function. Over time, she stops dressing up for herself. She stops exploring new interests. She stops pursuing the things that once made her unique. She becomes efficient but invisible, dependable but forgotten. And deep inside, she begins to ache for recognition beyond her duties. The silent battle also includes the struggle between gratitude and desire. On one hand, she tells herself she should be grateful for a stable life, for a family, for security. On the other hand, her soul whispers that something is missing. Gratitude and desire clash, and she feels guilty for wanting more. But the truth is, wanting to be seen as an individual is not selfish. It is human. When she doesn't receive that recognition at home, her heart becomes receptive to those who give it elsewhere. It's not always intentional. It's not always premeditated, but it's natural. When someone finally acknowledges her as a person and not just a role, the attraction goes far deeper than surface level attention. It touches the core of who she is. This loss of identity is compounded by routine. The repetition of daily tasks reinforces the idea that she is locked into a script she didn't fully write. She may love her family, but she doesn't always love the version of herself she has become. And when another person sees the parts of her that feel forgotten, she leans toward them not only for validation, but for liberation. It feels like she is being handed permission to exist as herself again. And that permission is something she may not feel she has at home. The battle with identity also shows up in the way she measures her worth. If her husband rarely acknowledges her, if her efforts are overlooked, if her individuality is ignored, she begins to question whether she matters outside of her function. That questioning is dangerous because it lowers her resistance to outside validation. A woman who is certain of her value is harder to sway. But a woman whose value feels invisible is eager to embrace recognition when it comes her way. And the recognition doesn't have to be dramatic. It can be as small as someone showing interest in her passions, her thoughts, or her feelings. The simplicity of being seen makes her feel alive. What outsiders often fail to realize is that married women in this silent battle are not always looking for escape. They are looking for themselves. They are searching for the woman they once knew, the one who felt confident, radiant, and whole. The person who helps her reconnect with that identity becomes powerful in her eyes because he represents not just attention, but a mirror reflecting back the version of herself she has been missing. That is why the loss of identity is such a dangerous vulnerability. When a woman no longer feels like herself inside her marriage, she will naturally drift toward the spaces where she feels that self come alive again because identity is not optional. It is essential. At the deepest level, every human being carries a fundamental need, the need to feel significant, to feel that their presence matters, that their contributions are seen, that their life is not just about existing, but about making an impact on the hearts of those closest to them. For married women, this longing is even more pronounced because marriage is supposed to be the space where significance is nurtured daily. Yet, for so many, that sense of significance fades over time, replaced by routine, obligation, and unspoken assumptions. She may still fulfill her role faithfully, but inside, she begins to question whether she is truly valued or simply taken for granted. That question, left unanswered, becomes the very space where vulnerability grows. When a woman enters marriage, she often feels significant in the beginning. Her husband pursues her, admires her, showers her with attention, and makes her feel irreplaceable. But as the years go by, what was once effort becomes assumption. He no longer tells her she is beautiful because he assumes she knows. He no longer praises her for her sacrifices because he assumes it's her duty. He no longer listens with full presence because he assumes her words will always be there. And in those assumptions, her sense of significance is quietly stripped away. She doesn't stop loving, but she starts doubting. She doesn't stop showing up, but she begins to feel invisible. The absence of significance is one of the heaviest emotional burdens a woman can carry. It's not the same as loneliness. It's deeper. Loneliness is the absence of company, but insignificance is the absence of value. She can be surrounded by family, by a husband, by children, and still feel invisible if no one affirms her importance. And when she feels invisible at home, her soul becomes hungry for visibility elsewhere. A simple acknowledgement from an outsider, someone saying they appreciate her energy, someone noticing her effort, someone valuing her opinion, suddenly feels like water to a thirsty spirit. It is not the size of the recognition that matters. It is the fact that it arrived where it was missing. This search for significance is not about vanity, it's about survival. A woman who feels insignificant begins to lose pieces of herself. She questions her worth. She doubts her attractiveness. She second guesses her place in her husband's heart. Over time, these doubts pile up until the desire for recognition becomes overwhelming. And the truth is, The moment someone offers her that recognition, the attraction is instantaneous. It bypasses logic because it speaks to the very core of her unmet need. She doesn't compare this new attention to her vows, her responsibilities, or her logic. She compares it to the neglect she feels at home. Against that backdrop, even small gestures of acknowledgement shine like gold. What makes this dynamic even more powerful is the way significance is tied to identity. A woman who feels significant feels alive. She sees herself not just as a role filler, but as a person of value. When significance is stripped away, she no longer recognizes herself. She becomes a shadow of the vibrant person she once was. And when someone else comes along and restores even a fragment of that feeling, it feels like resurrection. It feels like the return of something she thought was lost forever. That's why the search for significance is so consuming. It is not just about being noticed. It is about reclaiming the self that has been buried under neglect. Inside a marriage, the loss of significance often happens so gradually that no one notices. A husband may think everything is fine because the structure of the family remains intact. He sees meals being prepared, children being raised, responsibilities being handled, and assumes his wife is fulfilled. But beneath the surface, she may be battling the pain of invisibility. She may be smiling on the outside while silently longing for acknowledgement on the inside. And because she continues to function, he never realizes how much she is starving for validation. This gap between appearance and reality is what makes her so vulnerable when someone else notices her. Even the smallest gestures can reignite her sense of significance. A compliment, a kind word, a question asked with genuine interest. These may seem small to the one giving them, but to her, they feel monumental. They remind her that she is not just a background character in her own life. They remind her that her presence has weight, that her voice matters, that her existence is meaningful. That feeling becomes addictive because it fills the void she has been carrying silently for years. The search for significance is not about disloyalty, it is about wholeness. A woman who feels significant in her marriage rarely looks outside of it because her needs are being met at home. But when she feels unseen, unvalued, and unimportant, she unconsciously begins to gravitate toward places and people who make her feel alive again. The danger is not that she is actively searching for temptation, but that temptation becomes irresistible when it offers her the one thing she has been denied, the reminder that she matters. The deepest truth is that significance is a lifeline. Without it, she withers emotionally. With it, she thrives. And when she doesn't receive it from the person she has given her life to, she becomes highly receptive to anyone willing to provide it. It doesn't take much. It doesn't have to be grand or extravagant. It only has to be real. Because real acknowledgement is more valuable than empty security. In the absence of significance, a woman becomes prey not because she is weak, but because she is searching for the most fundamental human truth, that she is seen, that she is valued, and that she truly matters.